Hello everyone and welcome to this episode of Ignition Time. Here's some information you probably didn't expect. Unlike President Biden and the entire Biden administration and all of the spokespersons from the White House, many Americans do not, yes, I said do not see infrastructure as a top priority. Now, I can tell you that President Biden, there he is. What's up, President Biden sees infrastructure as a top priority, and all the other administration officials, including the US Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, including the director of the White House Economic Council, Brian Deese, and everybody else, including the US Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, have essentially pointed out the importance of the infrastructure package. But guess what? Many Americans do not see infrastructure as a top priority. Here's new reporting from CNN. Unlike President Biden, many Americans do not see infrastructure as a top priority. In fact, numerous polls have actually asked our fellow Americans about their priorities, and infrastructure, in fact, turns out to be a very low priority. According to new research from the January Pew Research Center poll, and you'll see the research on your screen right now, just 32%, yes, just 32% of our fellow Americans said that improving the roads, the bridges, the public transportation systems in our country should be a top priority for President Biden and Congress. And that was ranked second to last amongst 19 items that were asked about in the poll. In fact, let's see these 19 items on your screen right now. Strengthening the economy and dealing with the pandemic are the top two priorities of our fellow Americans. This represents a percentage of individuals who say that, X should be a top priority for the president and Congress. Number one, strengthening the economy. Number two, dealing with the pandemic. Number three, improving the job situation. Number four, improving the political system. Number five, reducing healthcare costs, securing social security, improving education, dealing with poverty, addressing racism, reducing crime. And you can see the second to the last is improving transportation and essentially improving infrastructure. And folks, this is a pretty interesting analysis which shows you that the American people have different priorities from the administration. Now, as you might expect, there were wide partisan gaps. Republicans and Democrats had a different opinion. You'll see this image on your screen, wide partisan gaps on the importance of addressing racism, climate change, and the pandemic, as well as the budget deficit. So you can see that individuals who were leaning Republican had a certain opinion, and individuals who were leaning Democrats had a different opinion. So again, on all of these issues that are important to our country long term, a lot of the important differentiators were tied to whether an individual was red or blue. I want you to know that on this channel, we are not about the red or the blue. We are about the red, white, and blue. I'm not Democrat. I'm not Republican. I'm American. We are all Americans first. But the important issues, strengthening the economy, dealing with the pandemic, that is something that consistently, it doesn't matter whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, that is something consistently that all of us want. Also, and this is not surprising, African American, white, and Hispanic Americans had a different opinion about addressing racism and the systemic inequality that exists in our system. You'll see that depending on whether you're white, whether you're Hispanic, or whether you're African American, you had a different priority, as it were, about different issues, and you can see those issues on your screen. But again, this goes back to infrastructure not being a top priority for a majority of the American people. Doesn't matter whether you're white, black, or Hispanic. Doesn't matter whether you're a Republican or whether you're a Democrat. Infrastructure is not at the top of people's minds. And this is another interesting aspect of the Pew Research study. Women place a higher priority than men on addressing issues around racism, criminal justice, and healthcare. So you can start to see the difference between men and women. And in other words, their priority is depending on gender about issues like racism, about issues like healthcare, criminal justice reform, improving education, terrorism, and much, much more. Also, people want the Republicans and the Democrats to work together. Here's an article on your screen from Monmouth University that says public wants the Republicans to work with Biden. The pandemic and domestic terrorism are the top priority for individuals who want the Republicans and the Democrats to work together. As always, you'll get a link to all of our resources in the description section below. And folks, also a Reuters and Ipsos poll taken last week showed that 45% of our fellow Americans backed the bill, but 27% opposed it. A lot of people, 28%, were simply undecided. You'll see that poll on your screen right now. And as always, we'll provide you with a link to this entire poll in the description section below. In short, people simply don't care as much about infrastructure as they cared about the stimulus checks, the first, second, and third stimulus checks. as they care about the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan. People simply don't care. People want the political system to work. People want Republicans and Democrats to work together, and they want an end to this pandemic, and they just want to get back to normal day-to-day life, business as usual. So it's very clear that the American people want both sides. They want the Republicans and the Democrats to work together to strengthen the economy and put an end to this pandemic. What is happening in the meantime? Our lawmakers, on the other hand, are arguing with each other, taking shots at each other, and the Biden administration is spending time talking about the new definition of infrastructure and the fact that they are willing to negotiate. In a new interview that was featured on ABC's The Week, featuring George Stephanopoulos, he was interviewing the United States Secretary of Energy, Jennifer Granholm. And in this first segment, the United States Secretary of Energy said this package will help states like West Virginia, because she was asked about the one and only Joe Manchin, the conservative Democrat, who's standing in the way as far as the liberal Democrats are concerned. And she said infrastructure is not static. It must evolve to meet the needs of the people. These are talking points that we are hearing from multiple administration officials. Let's roll the tape and hear this rather interesting exchange as the Biden administration continues to push for more infrastructure. Let's roll the tape and check this out.
There's more money in there for electric cars than there are for roads and bridges. So what is your definition of infrastructure?
But it can't be too small, because what we're talking about now needs to be transformative, and it has to be big.
I think it's more likely that we will have a package that is not paid for, and that is less robust.
We'll be open to good ideas and good faith negotiations. But here's what we won't be open to. We will not be open to doing nothing.
The debate over President Biden's plan. Let's join it now with one of the cabinet secretaries pitching it, Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm. Secretary Granholm, thanks for joining us this morning. You heard the roundtable right there. It seems that there are two courses ahead of the president right now. Stick with the big package, try to get Joe Manchin on board, break it up into smaller pieces to get Republicans on board. Let's talk about the first path first. What's the pitch to Joe Manchin to get him to buy off on this big package?
Because so much of this package will help not just West Virginia, but the states like West Virginia that have been historically mining fossil fuels, extracting fossil fuels. Republicans and Democrats agree upon the importance of not leaving communities behind where the market has moved in a different direction, like in coal. And so this will help to train people who are in that industry to move to these new technologies that are not a whole lot different from the skills that they may be using in mining coal. It will help to make sure that these industries are able to remove carbon from their emissions. So there's a lot in there that helps these states move to the future, in addition to roads and bridges, and in rural states, broadband and transmission. So much in here to love.
You say in addition to roads and bridges. You heard Chris Christie there saying that the president is not being fully truthful about what infrastructure actually is.
Yeah, what is infrastructure? Historically, it's been what makes the economy move. What is it that we all need to ensure that we as citizens are productive? So we need roads, we need bridges, we need transmission, you need lights in people's homes and offices. You need to make sure that people can actually go to work if they have an aging parent or a child. This is, as the president said this week, that infrastructure evolves to meet the American people's aspirations. And it's not static. In 1990, we wouldn't have thought that broadband was infrastructure because it wasn't on the scene yet. But we, of course, need broadband in every pocket of the country. Bottom line is, though, the president wants to negotiate with Republicans, and he wants to see a common vision for the future. Chris Christie talking about the future. We don't want to use past definitions of infrastructure when we are moving into the future. And by the way, when other countries are investing significantly in their infrastructure to overcome us. Research and development, that's also part of a manufacturing infrastructure that we have seen go. We're at a 70-year low in terms of manufacturing jobs as a percentage of the economy.
In the next segment, Granholm does state that the president is is willing to negotiate what this looks like, basically saying that, hey, we need to do this, we need the Republicans on board. We'll also hear from a Republican, because a Republican was interviewed right after Granholm, so make sure you watch this video all the way through to the end. But first, let's hear the administration official talk about the willingness, if you will, from the Biden administration to negotiate on the infrastructure package. Let's check this out.
The president is willing to negotiate what this looks like. He knows that his current plan is going to be changed. That's the nature of compromise. So whether it is in one big package or several packages, he wants to talk to Republicans because, again, a lot of the Republicans that he's talking to have actually introduced bills that are consonant with what's in this package. At the end of 2020, there was a massive Energy Act of 2020 that was hugely bipartisan, that made authorizations for investments just like this stuff. So I don't know how you can say in Texas that it's not important to invest in transmission grid. These are things that Democrats and Republicans know need to happen. It's just a question of the process to be able to get to the finish line.
Now, I do want us to hear from the other side as well, from the Republicans. But before we do that, here's a rather interesting exchange on Fox News featuring the congressman, the Democrat from California, John Garamendi, who talked about 4 things needing to be included in infrastructure. It's very clear, folks, that the Democrats are kind of redefining what infrastructure should be like. Let's check out this segment where John Garamendi, who's a congressman, who's a Democrat from California, talks about the 4 things that should be included in infrastructure. Let's roll the tape and check this out.
Let's start with one of the biggest criticisms coming from Republicans. They say when you really dig into the details of this bill, that a lot of the stuff in it has nothing to do with infrastructure. And let me just pop up some bullet points to show you what I'm talking about. We've got about $213 billion directed at home sustainability and public housing, 174 on electric vehicles, $400 billion on home-based care for the elderly and the disabled, $50 billion for research infrastructure. So what is your explanation? I mean, how do these things qualify as infrastructure?
Well, if you define infrastructure as concrete pavement for highways, obviously that is not what those expenditures are. But you need to also understand that infrastructure is much, much more than that. If we're going to build a modern, competitive America, we need to do at least 4 things. First of all, we have to have the best education system in the world. And that is part of this infrastructure program, rebuilding our schools, updating them in many different ways, including being able to take care of distance learning. Secondly, we need to have the best research in the world. That research money that perhaps others define as not infrastructure, that's fundamental. If we're not in the lead on research, we're simply not going to be in the lead. It's both the facilities as well as the researchers and the various programs. Thirdly, we need a modern physical infrastructure, roads, streets, transit, and broadband communication, which is a very serious problem for many, many of the Republican senators in the Midwest, and serious problem in my district in California. And also, a lot of discussion just a moment ago from my colleague talking about empathy, talking about America being morally on track.
So
part of that certainly deals with the border, but it also deals with our elderly. And we know from the COVID that there's a serious problem. And finally, housing. We have to house our citizens. So those are all critical infrastructure issues.
Now let's get back to ABC News, The Week, and George Stephanopoulos. Right after Granholm was interviewed, what George did was interview a Republican, the Republican Senator Roger Wicker from Mississippi. And this is what Roger Wicker said. He said the Republicans are willing to negotiate a much smaller package. But he said, when does the massive social, when does the massive social welfare spending end? Let's roll the tape and check out the concerns from the Republican. Let's watch.
Let's bring in Republican Senator Roger Wicker now from Mississippi. Senator Wicker, thanks for joining us this morning. You just heard Secretary Granholm right there said the only way America is going to win is if they pass this package now.
Well, listen, we're willing to negotiate a much smaller package, but I thought Jonathan Karl's lead-in piece was made a very good point. Americans voted for a pragmatic moderate that they thought Joe Biden was. Where is that centrist candidate they thought they were voting for back in November of last year? I mean, you've got You've got a proposal here of $2.3 trillion, 70% of which cannot, by any stretch of the imagination, be called infrastructure. That's on top of $1.9 trillion a few weeks ago, most of which was not COVID related. We're told another $2 trillion is on the way, and that's on top of this $1.5 trillion skinny federal budget that the president rolled out just this past week. Where does the spending end? And this is a massive social welfare spending program combined with a massive tax increase on small business job creators. I can't think of a worse thing to do. Secretary Granholm was talking about bringing us out of this recession caused by COVID. I can't think of a worse tax to put on the American people than to raise taxes on small business job creators, which is what this bill would do.
And folks, when I watch these interviews, I'm not just looking at what the officials say, but also clues about what they did not say. In this next segment, which is the final segment, there are some very interesting clues about the $1.9 trillion negotiation that took place between the Biden administration and Republicans and the meeting with the president. And let's take a look at what Wicker says. He says, if the president can come back with a counteroffer, both sides can strike a deal on infrastructure. Very interesting segment. Let's roll the tape and check out the state of the discussions behind the scenes on this infrastructure package from the Republican. Let's watch.
I would just say to this, I'm meeting with the president tomorrow at 1:30 if my plane gets into Washington on time. We are willing to negotiate with him on an infrastructure package, and this $1 trillion number is way too high for me. I'll just tell you. But negotiation has to be something different from what we had on the rescue plan.
But Senator, if
the president offered $1.9 trillion, Republicans came back with $600 billion, and the president said, that's not good enough, make me another offer. Now, that is normally not the way negotiations go. The president should have come back with a counteroffer, and if he will do that with the Republicans that are meeting with him in the White House tomorrow, I think we can get somewhere and have a much bigger infrastructure package than we were able to do under the last administration. I'm in favor of that, and I think the majority of Republicans are, and we get a lot of Democrats to help us on that. And then we'll talk about these social welfare programs that make up 70% of this new package that the president is calling infrastructure.
That's it, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think of this interesting divergence between what the American people want and what the Biden administration wants. Also the divergence between the Republicans and the Democrats as they battle it out, as they duke it out over the infrastructure plan. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Dr. Nitin Chhoda with Ignition Time. Please click the like button below. Please subscribe. Please enable notifications. That would mean a lot to me. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next episode of Ignition Time. Take care. Bye.